Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we are going to be talking about EndNote. So thank you for joining us. Today we have Drew Wright from the Wood Library, and he's going to be walking you through what EndNote is, how you can get a license, and how you can start using it. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that I have muted everyone's microphones just to prevent any unintended background noise. So if you have a question at any point during today's session, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand under the React button in your Zoom toolbar so that if you want to be taken off the mic, I can do so at an appropriate time. I'm also recording today's session, so if you want to watch this back later or share this with some of your colleagues who may have been unable to attend, feel free to do so. You'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as the resources that Drew mentions today. So without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Drew. Thanks so much, Drew, for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Just let me get my screen all set up. Good to go. Okay, so yeah, hello everyone. My name's Drew. I am one of the librarians here at Weil. Technically, I'm the scholarly communications librarian. Let me reshare my screen because I shared the wrong one. There we go. So part of what I do here in the college is help out on the publishing side of things and sort of provide support in kind of like every step of the publishing sort of workflow before publishing, after publishing, all that good stuff. And one of the big things that we do is support bibliographic management tools, which are a suite of tools that uh, serve the purpose of collecting references from online databases, organizing them in some, web-based or desktop-based software, and then integrating with Word to allow us to put our references into Word documents when we're writing manuscripts. There's a lot of different tools that do this. There's at any given time between like 10 and 20, sometimes more, that are widely used. Here at the college, we tend to focus mostly on EndNote. And the reason we do that is because it's widely used. It's been around for a very long time. So anyone who's done research in the last 20, 30 years has probably used EndNote at some point during their career there. And that's not to say that there's not that it's the best tool, that there's not newer tools that have kind of like cooler features or a little easier to use, or have like interesting stuff going on, but it's the tool that's used the most. So we tend to give these kind of talks in the context of EndNote. But if you have other tools that you enjoy using, the principles are typically the same. They collect references, they organize them, and they integrate with Word. I will say that if you do use other tools, and you are working with colleagues who use EndNote, you typically all have to be on the same tool. So even if you come in with experience with other similar tools, if your PI supervisor, the rest of your lab group members are all using EndNote, you kind of have to switch and get on the EndNote train as well. Thankfully, it's very easy to move references from one tool to another. So if you do use something like Zotero, Lean Library Workspace, Mendeley, something like that, and you need to switch over to EndNote, we can facilitate that and help out with that. And if you have any questions about that towards the end, we'll chat about that. Okay, so basically what we do in this little session is we do what is basically a demo. So we'll talk about the whole EndNote process from the start to the end, which is integrating with Word. And the very first thing with that is how do you actually get it? So it's a little more complicated than it probably needs to be, but because we're dealing with folks at different institutions and different operating systems and different computers, we kind of have to have a tiered approach to how this gets distributed. So I'll put this website in the chat so everyone has it. But this is essentially our, kind of EndNote landing page where everything kind of EndNote related stems from, especially with how to get it. So we sort of have three different paths on getting EndNote. First of all is if you have a tag device, if you have that silver ITS tag, which I'm not sure if there's even like physical tags anymore, but if it's a computer that you got from your department or the college, or if it's a personal device that has been tagged, you can get EndNote directly from the WCM App Store. um, both PCs and Macs. It'll be available there. One-click download, relatively straightforward. And we have instructions here if you have issues or questions accessing the App Store. If you have a personal device, so all Weill Cornell folks get a additional install on personal devices. So maybe it's a laptop that you don't want to get tagged, but you do a lot of work on. We have a form that you can fill out that gives you access to our institutional version of EndNote. The only thing I have to mention there, because it trips people up sometimes, if you're installing EndNote via that way on a personal machine, you do have to have your administrative credentials on that computer because it will ask you to authenticate before you install EndNote. So something to keep in mind. And finally, on the third method is if you're a Weill Cornell person, but you're working on NYP machine, you can still get access to our license of EndNote. You just have to go through NYP's service desk, and they have kind of like a parallel workflow set up there. They have our license and our EndNote information. We just can't put it on NYP computers for you, so we have to go through the NYP service desk. The fourth and kind of final way is through the cloud. So there is a web-based version called My EndNote Web, linked to there, and we'll talk about that and how it sort of integrates with the desktop version of EndNote, and how it integrates with the desktop version of Word and the online version of Word. We're sort of in a weird limbo period right now where the two versions of Word are kind of like confusingly interacting with the two different kind of versions of EndNote, the desktop and the web version. But we'll talk about that a little bit, and hopefully can convey that in a less confusing way as possible. So anyone have any questions just before we move on to the actual like using EndNote about how to get it? Has anyone had run into issues with either of these approaches or just questions in general? Perfect. So I'm going to continue on. We're going to start with the web version. So the web version is available to anyone from any location. We do recommend setting up an account for the first time, if you don't already have one, while on a Weill Cornell network, either through VPN or on site. And the other reason we suggest that is just it gives you kind of access to our institutional license. So the web version of EndNote will know who you are. It does not go by email. So if you log in elsewhere with your Weill Cornell credentials, it's not going to know who you are. It's just based on where you are located via network the first time you create your account. We do recommend using your personal account when you're setting up your email, when you're setting up your EndNote account. Just because you can take this with you as you go from institution to institution. And if you just set it up with whatever your email address is now, instead of your Weill Cornell credentials, you don't have to worry about changing that kind of further down the line. So set up your personal account while on a Cornell network, and you should be good to go moving forward. It requires check-in every now and then so that if you leave, you'll eventually lose access to our Weill Cornell account, but you'll probably get access to the account for whatever institution you join. Okay, that said, here is what our basic EndNote web interface looks like. This is kind of like my test library, so it's got a ton of references, ton of groups. When you first get started, it's going to be essentially blank, so you're not going to see as much stuff there. But it's a very straightforward interface where it just shows all references that you've added to your library. And that brings us to the very first thing you basically do with EndNote, and that's add references to your library. So we'll use PubMed as an example. We're going to do a basic search on PubMed. And you can import references from essentially any database that you can find online that allows you to export out of their interface with a structured reference style. And all scholarly databases will do that. Google Scholar does not. So if you use Google Scholar frequently, you're going to have some issues exporting out of that system into EndNote. It's possible, but there's a lot of like hoops you have to jump through. We always recommend going through PubMed. It's just going to be the cleanest and easiest experience. So even if you find the reference through other means, go into PubMed, export it out that way. So with my great search here, I'm going to say I want to include, this paper in my EndNote library to potentially cite later on. Um, in PubMed, you can go to send to and then citation manager, and it'll create a file and download that file. And what this does is it generates a file that bibliographic managers know how to read. So it's an NBib file. If you tried to open it without having EndNote or Mendeley or Zotero or any of their tools installed, it'll just kind of be like a bunch of gobbledygook. But these files are known to be readable by EndNote. So we've downloaded that reference. Next step, get it into our EndNote library. And there's different approaches, whether you're using the web or the desktop. And I'll sort of highlight the difference between those as we sort of go along. Right now we're on the web. So we'll say you're on a computer that doesn't have desktop installed on it and you want to add a reference to your library. We've downloaded it from PubMed. If we go to collect and then import references, we can find the file that we downloaded. And the only thing you have to do, and you only have to do this once, is you have to tell EndNote where you got the file from. Different databases format these files slightly differently. So the first time you ever use EndNote online, you'll have to go through and say, I got this record in this huge list of databases that you're probably never going to use or see again from PubMed. And I've already added it to my favorites, so it's going to be available for me in the interface until EndNote ceases to exist. So once we've done that, we go import option PubMed. And then if you want to add it to a group that you've already created, we'll talk about that in a minute, you can do that here, or you can create a new group if you like. So we're going to put it in my bone scaffolds group, import. And I put one reference in, it imported one reference, so we know that that worked successfully. And then if we open it up, we can check it if we wanted to. Yeah, we can go to added to library, newest to oldest, and that should be there right at the top, and it is. So likewise, just to do that again, if we wanted to do more than one paper, instead of clicking into each one, we can just say we want to, 3 and 4 here. And then if we go back up, same process, just slightly different. Send to citation manager, create file. Files downloaded now. Back to EndNote, collect, import references. And so you may be saying, like, if you've used similar programs like this before, or if you've used EndNote, you may be saying, this is a lot of clicking. Why can't we just go directly from the database to our EndNote library through like a browser plugin or something like that? That does exist. There are connections that you can make between databases and your EndNote library to make it like a kind of a one-click experience. The problem is if somebody updates something, so if your browser updates and whatever they changed doesn't support the new plugin anymore, or the plugin updates and it doesn't support what version of the browser you're on, that stuff tends to break. And it kind of breaks a lot on the EndNote side anyway. So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So we just always kind of recommend doing it what is kind of this old clunky way, where you're exporting the references out of PubMed and then you're importing them into EndNote, just because that will always, always, always work. You don't have to worry about third-party browser extensions working, or even if it's something that EndNote itself has made as far as a browser extension, it's not always going to be the case that that's going to work properly. And then if you forget about how to do it the manual way, you're sort of out of luck. And we don't want that to happen. So that's getting references into your EndNote library using the web version. Any questions about that before we move on to talk about groups? Cool. So you can organize your references with groups, and you can share these groups with collaborators. And that's all done with the Organize tab. So you can go to Manage Groups and then create groups if you want to with New Group, Or if we have an existing group that we've already created and we want to share it, we go to manage sharing. Um, what you would need from this is the email addresses of your collaborators. And the thing to note is that it has to be the email addresses that their account is set up under. So I use my personal account, and I just recommended everyone use their personal account. The issue with that is your collaborators may not know what your personal email account is, and you may not want to tell them for a variety of reasons. So that's something that you may have to keep in mind when you're going about this. Is it's all kind of shared through your the email address that you set your account up with. I don't necessarily care about that. I'd rather just have one email address and one account and just have that follow me around until the end of time. But is it an email address that you made 20 years ago and it's embarrassing now? That's up to you to to make that distinction and to decide how you want to kind of do that going forward. But that is how the sharing of groups work and how the sharing of references work. And what that allows you to do is have a sort of a central repository of all the references. So if you're working on a paper collaboratively, which in 2025, that's just how we write papers now. All members of the group are going to have access to the same group of references, even if someone else is adding references to your library. Any questions about that? And then we'll pop over to the desktop. Cool. So web version, fairly limited. Again, I usually only use it just to add references when I'm not at a computer that has my desktop. You can get a very stripped down version of the Word plugin from the web version as well. So if you absolutely have to do some writing on a computer that doesn't have EndNote installed, you'll get like a passable version from the web version as well, and is accessible anywhere you are. All right, so the desktop version. You notice there's a lot more stuff going on right away. It's very, like, if anyone remembers kind of iTunes, it's got a very iTunes-ish layout. All the groups that we've already created in the web version are there. And the reason they're here and I can see them is because I've set up my desktop library to sync with my web library. And the very first thing I recommend people do after you've downloaded EndNote is to set up that syncing. So it's wherever your preferences are. In Word, or in Office, Microsoft, it's in Edit Preferences. That's in a slightly different location for your Mac users. But you find your preferences and you go to Sync. Enable Sync should be already selected, and then you basically just use the same credentials that you used in your personal EndNote account. And then what this does is it just basically pushes and pulls any references that you add to your desktop or your web version to the other interface. So if I say I want to sync now, it should pull in those 4 papers that I just put into the web version, which it did. What I tend to like to do and recommend people take a look at is decide whether or not you want to have this sync automatically checked. What this means is that anytime you open or close your desktop, it's going to push and pull with your web version. I leave that unchecked because, again, especially for this, because it's like a demo kind of library and I have a ton of references. I don't want to have to sit there and wait 10, 20, 30 seconds potentially for everything to sync. So I leave that unchecked and then I just do it manually every now and then. But if you have a relatively small library, you can definitely have that clicked and you don't have to worry about manually pushing this. Every time you open the desktop, it's going to sync up and you'll be working with the most recent group of references that either you've added via the web or that collaborators have added. Okay, so the other thing that I want to show you with the desktop is how to add references from PubMed to the desktop library. And on the PubMed side of things, it's actually the exact same interface. So I'm going to clear what I've selected just so I don't get any dupes. And I'm going to say, show me this paper, and we want to put these two into our library. So I've selected them, send to citation manager. And the only difference really with the desktop is that in most cases, once it's downloaded, you can just open up that file and it'll automatically import them into your EndNote. So these are those two papers that we just exported out of PubMed, double clicked on the downloaded file, and then they were imported into my library in a special little folder, that's temporary folder called imported references. And then from here, if I wanted to move them, I could just drag and drop to my bone scaffolds folder. And we see that it's been added to that group, and we are good to go. Any questions about that? Great. The main other things that you would do in the desktop is that you can edit the actual information in a lot easier way than you would with the web version via the views on the side. And I have a chat real quick, so let me check. Yeah, so show it again how you got to the desktop. Perfect. I can do that. So we're going to go to PubMed. We'll just do one this time. Say I want this guy. So we go send to citation manager, create file, and then we can just double click on the file that gets downloaded. And it kind of happens in the background. I'd kind of like it if EndNote like went to the front so you could actually see that it was brought in. But if you go to your EndNote library, it'll be there, imported references, and then here is drag and drop. You can do it via the kind of like more manual way by going to File, Import, File, and this is the exact same interface that the web version had. It's just with the desktop, you tend to not have to do that because it will remember, especially if you're using from PubMed, it'll remember every time that your import option is PubMed and do what you want it to do. I guess if you're worried about importing duplicates, you can do it via this way. So you can say like discard duplicates, or you can do that after the fact, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Any other questions about that? Cool. So we have our interface here. If we need to edit any of this information, we can. And I'll get to that question in just a second, the difference and the benefit between the desktop and the web version. So we can edit any information here. We can keep an eye on what is available to be edited. And sort of what I mean by that is I've brought in relatively new papers. And from what we know about references and what journals, et cetera, like to see with citations, they like to see things like page numbers and volume numbers and issue numbers. But when you're working on papers that just came out like yesterday or the day before, they may not have any of this information here. So what you can do is either edit this manually, that's annoying. Nobody wants to do that. Or every now and then, if I'm working on a paper, what I'll do is if you right click on any grouping of references or single references, and you go find reference updates, what this does is it looks in EndNote's database, which is linked to Web of Science, and sees if any of the information that is in the record has been updated yet. This one has not been. So you're not going to get the page numbers and everything get brought in, but in a month or 2 months, maybe they will have been. So what I usually recommend is if you're working on a project, every now and then just go through it and do find reference updates for your entire library for this project. Because what that'll do is it'll bring in the appropriate information that is currently missing. And that way, whenever you go to write your citation, it won't look like this. It'll have page numbers, volume numbers, issue numbers, and all the things that most journal styles require. Questions about kind of editing the reference itself? Cool. And the other thing that I like to show off with the desktop version is it allows you to automatically pull in the PDFs that are affiliated with the record. And this is something that the web version can't do. You have to manually attach records to the web version. Here, we can just select everything, click edit reference, or not edit reference, sorry, find full text. I have to authenticate. Yes, yes, yes. It'll think about it. And then what this does is it actually checks our holdings for our subscription information to see if we have access to these PDFs. If we do, it attaches it to the record. If not, which is this is looking like a bad example because we may not have anything attached. It'll let you know that it couldn't find a PDF. Come on, work for one of them. And again, this is an issue potentially with having something that's brand new because a lot of our holdings have embargoes on them, 6 months, 12 months sometimes. So I'll do some older ones so we can see what that actually looks like. Let's try that again. So you can see the ones that have paper clips icons. These are ones where the PDF has been found and attached. And I've struck out. So this is a terrible example. Apologies. But when it does work, it ends up looking like this. You have the PDF along with your library in your EndNote library. And if you are into marking up stuff, you can make notes. You can make little sticky notes. You can edit it. Because it's 2025, there's also a feature where EndNote will produce an AI summary of the article for you. That is not super helpful at the moment, but maybe eventually it'll be pretty decent. So here's one of the new ones that I found. Um, you know, not in English, problematic for me as a reader, but it's there. It works. It found it for me, and it attached it to the record if I wanted to read that. Any questions about working with PDFs inside of the EndNote interface? Cool. So the main differences between the desktop and the web version, the desktop has way more bells and whistles. There are, like as I mentioned before, there's the ability to interact with PDFs. There's the ability to more easily edit the references. The main difference, though, is that it has a better version of the plugin that comes along with it. So when we get to the Word plugin, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it allows you to do more stuff to the references. And those are things that you may not ever really need to do. But occasionally you'll get a journal that has a very strange reference style. And you may not be able to find it in this giant list of reference styles that comes along with EndNote. So here's like a really long list if you wanted to see what styles are already stored in EndNote. Again, we'll talk more about that on the word integration side of things. If your journal's not in this list, you can search online. So just do name of journal, EndNote style in Google, and you'll typically find it if someone's made one for you. But occasionally you have to edit an existing style and just tweak it for the web version of whatever journal you're working with. And that can only be done in the desktop. And that is not a super fun friendly process. And if anyone has to do that, we usually recommend just reaching out to us at the library to do it. But it is something that's only available in the desktop. So PDF handling is much better. Organization is much better because one of the things I didn't really talk about here is that you can actually get EndNote to organize your PDFs on your desktop for you. Like as PDFs get brought in, it can organize them into files and do all that stuff. So kind of like next level file organization. So you're not in having to keep track of all that stuff yourself. If you're curious about it, that's under PDF handling. So it renames files for you if you want. I'm not a big fan of that, but it kind of like, to me, it messes things up, but some people are really into it. But that's another thing that is desktop only. So hopefully that sort of answers that question. Would you be able to translate that PDF to English? So with some stuff, I do play around every now and then with having, I mean, previously Google Scholar translating PDFs. Usually like East Asian languages, it's really bad at it. And it doesn't really help all that much. But with things that are Roman based, I guess, it tends to have a much higher success rate at making something that makes sense. So I assume that's kind of going to be one of our next level AI ventures is better real time translation of foreign language PDFs. Um, at the moment, at least in my experience, it's not quite there yet for all languages, but theoretically you could. Not inside EndNote, but outside and using kind of other tools that exist just for that. So somebody asks, do we have experience with other platforms like Zotero? So yes, so the sort of big ones that people use in the college, EndNote, Zotero, um, Spywheel, which just recently got renamed to Lean Library Workspace, which is a mouthful. I don't know really why they did that. Um, and those three and Mendeley, and those four are really kind of like the big players in the uh, citation management game. I actually prefer Lean Library Workspace. So when I'm writing myself, I tend to not use EndNote unless all of my other collaborators are. And that's really the big thing. You kind of have to be on the same platform that everyone else is if you're working in a group. And it just kind of so happens to be that EndNote has been around the longest. It's kind of had the largest user base. So if everyone else is using EndNote, you kind of have to use EndNote. But the same logic applies. If everyone's using Zotero, you sort of have to use Zotero. Lean Library Workspace and Mendeley follow the same thing. They're not particularly better or worse than each other. They just have different interfaces. The workflows are all the same, pulling in references, organizing them, integrating into Word. Some of the smaller tools tend to innovate quicker. So Zotero was kind of one of the first ones to be completely web-based. So all the other ones that came after that had like cloud versions and web versions were more or less, piggybacking off of Zotero's success. Mendeley was one of the first that really integrated with PDFs and PDF handling. All the other ones then sort of like glommed onto that. Lean Library Workspace was the first one to really crack online collaborative writing. So they were the first ones whose plugins for Google Docs and Word was like very successful. And EndNote is now currently playing catch up there. So they all sort of have innovated in slightly different ways. EndNote does the kind of evil corporation thing where they take all of these other things that other people have done and eventually integrate them into their platform. So you do eventually get all of the things. It's just you're working on a more enterprise level, like established piece of software than what are sometimes startups that fade away. But things like Zotero, Lean Library Workspace, Mendeley have been around for a long time. So it really just comes down to what the other people in your group are using if you're collaborating with other folks. But again, I actually don't use EndNote personally when I'm writing, but it's the kind of the standard software that most people use. All right, any questions about that stuff before we move over to the Word integration side of things? Cool. So the Word integration is kind of the bread and butter of these tools. I'm only kind of like slightly exaggerating when I say that the development of bibliographic management tools and their integration to Word is almost as important to the kind of like writing process as Word itself. Because you can imagine pre-word processor, pre-integration, you basically had to retype your paper every time you were submitting to a different journal. So if you were writing for Nature, you've formatted the whole reference list and all the in-text citations for Nature. It gets rejected. You have to re-format the whole thing for Lancet or whatever, and then that takes an extremely long time to do that. So what you kind of are saving here when you're using these kind of like newer tools is the ability to just change references on a fly. So before we get into that, I'm going to pop back into the chat really quick. So online search features of EndNote. So you'll notice I did not mention that. You can't search databases in EndNote. So online search, you can search PubMed with EndNote. However, you have to be hyper specific about what you're looking for. You can't do a topic search here. The only time we would ever recommend using this stuff is if there's a paper that you know that you need to bring in. So if you know like author, year, title, that's the default settings. Then you can just pop those things into here and then search PubMed and then just drag it into whatever folder you want to drag it into. Please do not ever do a topic search in EndNote. What you're missing out on are all the kind of value add features that the PubMed interface has, and it's not great, but there is stuff that you can do with your results to refine and do an altogether better search in PubMed interface itself that you can't get here. So this doesn't do any sort of kind of like uh, mesh translation, or you can't do sort of advanced searching here, and you have to again be hyper specific with what you're looking for. So if you know the paper that you need to pull in, um, just search the PMID, which is the unique identifier on PubMed, and it'll pull it in for you. Just do not do a search. Do not do a search in your EndNote interface. As a librarian, that pains me if that were to happen. Please don't. Um, so yep, Zotera's Chrome snapshot. So yep. Again, I'm not an EndNote rep, so I have no problem with people being like use Zotero, it's better. In certain ways, I agree. That's definitely true. But yeah, the Zotera's sort of web native, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And it's much better at collecting references and putting them into your library in fewer clicks than EndNote is, 100%. But again, it's a who are you working with, who are you collaborating with question. And Holly, we can talk about desktop sync kind of at the end of the call, if that's okay with you. We can either hop on another call or we can you know hang out. Okay, we're gonna pop into Word. Like that. So here's our Word doc. When you install EndNote, this will automatically get installed in your Word. If not, you can install like a version of Word of the plugin from the desktop or from the web version of EndNote, and then that will get you the same kind of functionality here. It works fairly straightforward. We're typing, typing, typing. We do insert citations. Let me make sure my library is open. So this opens up a search into our library. So it tells us which library it's operating from. So this is sort of a relic of kind of not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago. People would have multiple libraries, and so you would never really know which library was being read. We sort of really recommend only having one library these days and split up into different groups. So this kind of lets you know that it's pulling from the right thing. We have a search, and what this search is author, title, abstract, and any other reference or any other field that's in the reference. We say we want to insert that citation. I have mine set up to instant formatting off. And what this does is this tells EndNote whether or not to automatically format the in-text citation, which will be here, and the reference, which is here. I tend to not like doing that because it bogs the writing process down sometimes. But if you hit update citations, we have our in-text citation and we have our bibliography that's being generated automatically at the end of whatever document we're working on. So we'll just do that again. Cites, we'll do this one instead. update. And then if I wanted to have it done automatically, I can just turn this on, which I think it's on by default these days. But just so you can kind of see what that looks like. So we've inserted it. It's calculating. It says this is the third reference, and it builds the bibliography down here at the bottom. If we want to move stuff around, we can copy paste. And it doesn't update automatically, but if we hit update citations, it will. And what this is doing is it's doing all of this based on what style we're writing for. So this is a generic kind of biomed style called Vancouver. But if we wanted to format it for JAMA, we just go through, change the style to JAMA. And now it's changed the citations. It's changed the bibliography to whatever style we want. And again, there's a giant list here. If you can't find what you're looking for here, you can go online, search for the journal name, EndNote style, and it'll pop up. Just do that again so you can see what it looks like. Citation style, bibliographic style has been updated. Any questions about inserting references? What if you need multiple in-text citations? So the easiest way to do that, there's multiple ways. You can either go into your EndNote library and select the multiple references, and then you can right-click it that way. I always find it's easier just to do them one at a time, and that's just for clarity's sake so that I don't mess up. Because I'm prone to messing things up. So you can highlight, go to insert, and we'll say we want to add to this one. And now it's going to auto calculate. And if it's taking a while, I can just say push. So now we have 3 and 4, 2 citations for this one statement. It updates the bibliography in kind. And you can continue to do that however many times you need to do it. Any other questions about that? And then I'll sort of get into some of like the common pitfalls that you might experience. So let me see. So typically I do reference at the end rather than as paragraphs being generated. Is there a way to retroactively insert references? That's actually how I work as well. So that is why I have instant formatting turned off usually. So that way, as I'm writing, pop, 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 and then I can either insert the reference this way and it doesn't actually like update anything. Pop, 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 pop. And then when I'm kind of done writing, I can just save the document and then update everything all at once. Or you can sort of do I'm just going to make a note to myself to add, Smith 2025 here. And then type on and then do like, write 2022. And then at the end of your whole like writing process or whenever you want to stop, you just go through and then you just add each reference. So you go add Smith 2025, go through and do add, write 2022. That's, again, as I said before, that's actually how I write. I don't like to insert the citations as I'm writing because I find it kind of disruptive and it messes with my flow. So I either do instant formatting off or I just make a note to myself. And then at the end, I just do like a sprint to just get all the citations in. Does that make sense? Cool, awesome. And I'll sort of double back on that when we get to the end really quick when I talk about writing on online Word, which we're still sort of in the infancy of. But if there's no more questions about inserting references just in general, I will say that you're not going to really play around with a lot of this stuff. I don't think I've ever really used any of these buttons before. The only thing I do recommend taking a look at is getting familiar with the concept of a traveling library. So what this does is anytime that you insert a reference into a Word document, so I have inserted references into this doc, and I'm going to send it to Vanessa, and she's going to work on it. Word and EndNote create a library called a traveling library that attaches itself to this Word doc so that when Vanessa gets it, she has access to all of the references that I've added that she may not have access to. Maybe we're not sharing an EndNote group, or maybe, something with the syncing has gone awry, or something like that. But what Vanessa should do when she gets my document is she should go to export traveling library. And what that does is it pulls all of the references that I have inserted here into Vanessa's library. And that just allows her to have access to everything that I've done to the document. And it allows EndNote and Word on her end to be able to talk to each other. And it creates that sync between the two documents, or to the two programs. Because we have different operating systems, different versions of Word, and different versions of EndNote. And so this export traveling library is basically kind of a way to sync all of that stuff across all of the different systems, so that her OS version of Word and EndNote act the exact same as my OS version of Word and EndNote. It's a little confusing sometimes and a little complicated, but that fixes a lot of problems when you're writing papers collaboratively, especially if you're emailing it back and forth, which I understand is probably not the way that most folks write collaboratively anymore, but it still does happen. And there still are a lot of issues that can be fixed just by exporting traveling library and syncing Word with EndNote through the plugin. So I do just like to mention that can usually be the source of very complicated, confusing issues that are sometimes easily fixed by the traveling library. So before we go into the EndNotes online stuff, so separate doc with just references. So yes, so if you do want to generate just a list of references, you can actually do that in EndNote. So if you have all of your kind of references in a folder that you want to include for a paper, so say we're writing a paper, for my bone scaffolds, and I'm going to sort this by author, and I just want all of these papers to be included in my bibliography. If you Control A, select everything. Come on. There we go. My mouse finally started working. So if you copy formatted reference, this copies all of the references here in this style. So if I do copy formatted reference, and then I go to like a clean Word doc and paste it, it's that whole list in Vancouver, and it just pastes it as text. So it can't be interacted with or like updated or anything like that. It's just text. So this can be helpful when you're doing, like sometimes reviewers want copies of the bibliography that don't have any EndNote coding on them. This is one of the ways that you can generate that. And it's one of the ways that you can just generate bibliography, like formatted bibliographies. Like if you have a folder with your own papers and you just need a bibliography really quick, just copy formatted reference and paste it into a text doc, and you'll have it. Okay, so now really quick, the sort of most confusing part of this whole process, and where we sort of are at in the sort of like writing meta at the moment, is with our online versions of Word. So this is how we all collaborate. This is how we all write. I should have logged in before I did this. So I'm just going to go into my online Word. And what everyone should have in their online versions of Word in O365 on OneDrive or SharePoint, or however you call it, is in the References tab. You should have the EndNote plugin already installed. So it will be there. It should be there. If not, let me know. Gotta log in. That's not my password. So it's the same credentials that you've used to create your web version. This always happens. It says an insert error has occurred, but it always works, and that's something that they're working on. But as far as the actual functionality goes, it works the same as the desktop version of Word. So we have our EndNote libraries. If we want to work in specific folders, we could. So if we just wanted to work on our bone scaffold folder, we could do that. This is synced to your web library, not your desktop library. So you sort of have to make sure that everything's all synced up before you go to insert references. So this is actually not going to have any of the references that I just added to my desktop until I synced. So this is one of the big kind of drawbacks to how they've implemented this, and why they have a desktop version and a web version that don't automatically sync. So that's why you have to kind of keep them synced up together. But it works the same way as everything else. Let me just move my stuff out. So say we wanted to add, these papers, insert citation, update citations. And why it didn't update that, I have no idea. So the key thing to know about the integration of the desktop or the web version of Word is it sucks. So we always recommend, if you're writing via collaborative EndNote or collaborative Word, to do the method that I sort of said earlier and just do Smith 2023, write, 2025. And then at the end, it'll just be someone's job to go through and insert all of the references after the fact. That is always going to be the easiest way to do that. It's just going to be quicker. It's going to be simpler. And it's going to prevent being annoyed by these types of errors. And the only reason we really talk about this is because people find this and they're like, oh, sweet, EndNote's integrated with EndNote Word. And then you're like, or EndNote's integrated with online Word. And then we kind of have to say, like, you kind of have to use this at your own risk. This is, I'm not even sure if it's like beta, it's alpha. Not great, does not work super well. Does get better though, or it has been getting better. So eventually this will be on par with Mendeley's version. LinkedIn Learning's version is very good, and I haven't tried Zotero's version yet. But the EndNote version's there, but it's not quite ready for prime time yet, just to be aware. So if everyone's writing in SharePoint, which again, I just assume everyone is, that's something you may have to think about and come to terms with if you're collaborating with EndNote. And that is all I had prepared, because I wanted to leave a little bit of time for extra questions. Any other questions besides Holly's? And Holly's, I'll reach out to you offline and we can sort of hash this out. But any questions in the last few minutes
We
before
just
we
got one.
bounce? Okay.
How
How do you add or remove people to a group or library? Sure. So to me, that's easier in the web version, the web interface, but I'll show you how to do it in both. So in the web version, under the Organize tab, there's Manage Groups. And here's where you can create new groups and manage sharing for existing ones. So manage sharing, start, and you can add people based on email address here. And then to remove folks, if you go to one that's already been shared, you just delete them via this interface. And then that's how we sort of get to where we do. In the desktop version, it's under groups. And then it's the same interface, essentially. This one's not shared with anyone, but you can remove or add using the same functionality to remove people this way. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah, I kind of paint EndNote in a bad picture sometimes when I'm going through this because I'm very aware of like all of the places that it can go wrong. But for most cases, it's very stable and it does the job that you need it to do. It's just when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong, and it always goes wrong when you need it to work perfectly. Like you're coming up with a deadline, you have a grant application due, you really want to get this paper out the door, and now you're getting errors or like a file's been corrupted, and references aren't updating for whatever reason. It always happens when you don't want it to happen. So that's just always my disclaimer is that what's the phrase? It's like um, hope for the best but expect the worst. That's sort of my experience with EndNote. So we see things. I see things when they go as wrong as possible, but that's not the majority of the case that people use EndNote. It's works fairly well, and I just always recommend just trying to keep it as simple as possible. So if you're sharing a document with a lot of people, just don't put the EndNote references in yet. Just wait till the end, because every person that touches that document, there's potential for some sort of corruption or a sync issue to occur or anything like that. So eventually, the online version of Word EndNote plugin will be stable enough that it sort of fixes all of those problems, but it's just not there yet.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. Great questions. And as always, thank you to Drew for taking us through another EndNote session. For anyone who came in late, I'll be sure to send out the recording and the links that Drew referenced during his presentation. And if you do have any further questions, I'll send out the LibGuide that Drew shared so that you'll have his contact information as well as information about how to use EndNote. So thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.